That's why I could step down to the next level. Is that easier?
No, that's fine. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. We're now standing in front of the famous $1 million staircase, which got its name because the newspaper reporters got a hold of the price that it cost while it was being built. But actually, by the time it was completed 13 years later, it would end up costing $1.5 million. This staircase is also known as the Great Western Staircase, and it was patterned after the Grand Staircase in the Paris Opera House. In my introduction, I mentioned where we went through 4 different architects, each one bringing their own style to the building. Therefore, the state capitol has a blending of styles. We have Victorian Gothic, Italian Renaissance, Moorish, and Romanesque. Well, the original plans for this staircase was just to be a very simple one with a set of lion's heads on the first floor landing. But by the time it got to Isaac Perry, the last architect, the man got so exuberant with his new project that he would end up hiring 600 stone carvers to work on it. Now, these men would work 10-hour days from sunup to sundown, being paid only $5 for the day. Now, by today's standards, that may not sound like that much money, but keep in mind this was done over 100 years ago, and the average rate for pay back then was only $2.25 a day. So, in fact, it was a nice job for the men to have. What their carvings consist of are 77 famous people. You can see up here by President Grant, President Lincoln, Senator Conkling, and Dickinson. Now, normally, if a man had spent 13 years of their life on one project, they would receive recognition by signing their name somewhere on the piece. But Isaac Perry told the men only the famous people could have their names carved under their faces. But instead, what he told the men for recognition was, why not carve yourselves? After all, they were all stone carvers by trade, and that's exactly what they did. Because if you look to the right and left of the larger face up there, you will see 2 smaller faces. They are known as capital unknowns, and there's over 1,000 of them throughout the whole staircase. So that is their recognition, because that's the stone carver's face, his family, and his friends. He could carve anyone he wanted to as long as no 2 faces repeated. So it got to the point where even wealthy people would come into the building and pay the stone carver to have their face carved for all time. Or let's say the artist was walking down the street and saw someone with an interesting looking face, might pull him in, sit him down for 2 years, and carve him. Well, hopefully a little quicker than that. The staircase itself is done in a special sandstone which they imported from Scotland called Coarse Hill Free Sandstone. When the stone is first quarried or taken from the ground, the stone is very soft, so they can cut it with a knife rather than chisel it like other stones. Then with exposure to air over a 2-year period, it will gradually harden, and with it were left behind all the beautiful and detailed carvings that you see. This staircase does make our state capitol priceless, mainly because the men that worked on it have since retired. But keep in mind, we are looking up to the 5th floor and is completely carved through all the lower areas beneath us. It has everything carved through it: animals, birds, people, all the signers of the Declaration of Independence, all the counties of New York State. It truly is a stone carver's masterpiece. Okay. This is one of 4 major staircases, and all 3 of them originally had skylights. If you look above, you'll see that it has been painted over with a slate roof above it. They did do that during World War II for protectionary purposes. Now again, as part of the restoration which is ongoing in the Capitol, they were thinking of going back and restoring the original dome. After they covered it over, it made it very dark in here. So when Governor Rockefeller was in office, he added the 2 chandeliers that you see at the top, but the rest of the lighting is all original. Again, we are waiting for a feasibility from the state architect to see if they will go back and restore that. Okay, let's see. Okay. We're now standing in our Senate lobby, and the purpose of this room is a place where our state senators can come and relax in between their sessions. This is the room where they can talk to their lobbyists on key issues, and in fact that is where the word lobby originated from, was a room such as this. If there was an important bill being signed here today, this is the room where you would see newspaper reporters, or when you see your state senator on the news, this is the area where they are usually interviewed from. You'll notice that this room has been all restored, again, as part of the restoration in the late 70s, early 80s. And the room itself was designed by Henry Hobson Richardson, one of the finest American architects back then, best known for his rich use of building materials, colors, and textures. The furniture that you see in this room was designed by Richardson, but it is not the original because that was placed in the Court of Appeals, which used to be part of this building. But this is a replica of the original. The carpeting is laid in strips because the original looms back then were only 27 inches wide. A more recent addition to the Senate lobby are the beautiful Senate gates, and these were designed by Albert Paley, who is an international metalsmith, sculptor, and former jeweler of Rochester. What is amazing about the Senate gates is that they weigh 3 tons in total weight. These are solid brass, iron, and bronze. I'm going to ask a volunteer from my group to see if she can move this one wing, which weighs 1.5 tons. Let me open it. See if you can push it open that way. Easily. Thanks, that's good. And actually, a small child can open it easily. Because the gates are perfectly balanced, and again, the weight's distributed down below. Again, the man that designed the gates, Albert Paley, is one of the finest architects in the United States, and he has designed a chalice for Pope Paul. The artist is currently working on a $20 million project in Washington, D.C. He's in charge of all the lamp lighting and all the tree gratings that go along Pennsylvania Avenue and around the president's home. But because these gates are more modern or contemporary in design, to give balance and harmony to this room, they later added the lunettes or the crystals that you see opposite it. These windows were designed by Hilda Sachs in conjunction with our state architect, John Misek. And when the windows were designed, the architect asked the artist to please incorporate movement into them, sort of to show the flurry of activities of our state senators at work. Okay. Okay, we are now in the Senate chamber, and again, this room was designed by Henry Hobson Richardson, a very prominent architect in that period, and you are looking at the room just the way it looked when it first opened on March 10, 1880. Richardson designed the room and made it one of the most, wait, can we start over? Sorry, couldn't remember the, okay. We're now standing in the Senate chamber, and this room was designed by Henry Hobson Richardson, again, a very prominent architect of that period. You are looking at the room just the way it looked when it first opened on March 10, 1880. Richardson ended up making this one of the most beautiful legislative chambers in the United States, and according to the Smithsonian Institute, it is the most beautiful. To begin, the ceiling that you see is all hand-carved oak with recesses up to 4 feet deep. The gold right below the ceiling is 24-karat gold leaf. It is gilded fiberglass coated with the gold. But at one time, that used to be a gold leather that ended up cracking. The wood that you see along the side is all hand-carved mahogany and Spanish red leather. The squares to the front and rear of the chamber are Mexican onyx, surrounded by bands of Sienna marble imported from Italy. While the chandeliers, both in the lobby and the chamber, are replicas of the original. These are brass fixtures and on a pulley system so they can be raised or lowered. Once a year, we go through the entire building and they replace every light bulb in it. You will notice that the Senate chamber is much smaller than the Assembly because we have 61 state senators, the majority in this room being Republican. The person in charge of all our senators is always the Lieutenant Governor of New York State. His name is Stanley Lundeen, and he is the President of the Senate. He would be seated at the uppermost chair, and you will notice that there are 2 chairs to either side of his chair. One is for his assistant, the other one is for a clergyman who will open and close each session with a prayer, and they rotate them between the 3 major religions of our state, which is Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish. The horseshoe-shaped desk is for the staff, and the chairs with the school desk arms directly in front of it is for the newspaper reporters. They can just lean against the arms of the desk and write stories as the news happens currently. The small desk in the center is for the recording secretary. He or she will keep track of all the minutes of each session and has control on the microphones on each of the senators' desks. You'll notice that when I speak in this room, I can talk in a normal tone of voice and I can be heard anywhere in the chamber. That is because the acoustics in the room are very, very good. But let's say when they come back into session, two senators would like to have a private conversation, and they wouldn't like anyone else to hear what they are discussing. What they have been known to do is step into one of these two fireplaces. One is for the Republicans, the other for the Democrats. And these fireplaces are 6 feet tall, wide, and deep, so they will hold 3 senators comfortably. Now, at one time, the principal means of heating the room was with the fireplaces, but unfortunately, they ended up breaking down because they had a problem with the flue. So now this is their new use. Hold on, I got it. There's a couple other things. Okay. The last thing about the Senate chamber, if you look over to the side, you'll see where some of the squares or blocks were never carved into. That is because Richardson ended up dying before this room was ever finished. But because the room was so beautiful and it really embodied Richardson's tastes and ideas, they left the room exactly how he left it, as a tribute to him. Again, this man was one of the finest American architects back then, and he was so popular, in fact, that they would end up naming a style of architecture after him called Richardson Romanesque. He is the same man that designed our City Hall here in Albany, as well as many other important buildings throughout the United States. I will also mention that Richardson died while only in his 40s. He was very young as an architect, and in fact, perhaps never reached his true architectural talent in spite of the beauty of this room. Again, keep in mind, the purpose of the Senate and the Assembly is where all the bills are made. If the majority of each of these chambers pass a bill, it is sent on to the governor, and if he signs it, the bill becomes a New York State law. But the governor has the right to veto or vote the bill down. When he does that, the bill is sent back to both the rooms. This time, would have to pass by 2/3 majority in order to override the governor's veto. I think that's it. Just trying to go through. I mentioned the squares, Mexicanonics, and all that. Okay. Okay. Basically, you can do 2 pictures on the shooting, because without me there's all blocks up in the Sienna marble. You're going to see that were never carved into. You can span the marble up above. It's like in this arch, and you'll see where the notches are missing. And the best example of the uncarved blocks is actually on this side, but you'll see it on both sides because they left them, they stand right out. I'm trying to think if there's any. Oh, you know what I forgot about? The clock being the official timepiece of the state Senate. Yeah, there's a big clock in the room that they start all the session by. I don't know how.
Well, we can put it back in after, or we can just skip it. It's
Okay. Yeah. Just trying to think. Well, yeah. All I say is that it's designed by Richardson. It's the official timepiece, but that can be added in later. But I think that's pretty much everything in the room.
Okay.
Yeah.